and there's some toast. But what happens is about 3 or 4 hours later, most American men are going,
To the wife.
to the wife, and that never happens, actually. But then you're headed to the car, and that's it. And these guys, they would party, and they would enjoy partying, and sometimes they would party a second day after the bride and groom had disappeared for overnight, and they would come back. They would party some more. These marriages were arranged when the couple were kids, as in many, many parts of the world, even yet.
Forgot about that.
So this would have been an arranged marriage, and those marriages actually, overall, worldwide, they have a better success rate than our marriages, where we sort of leave it to a lot of chance and to apps and but it's very different because the bride and the groom at times know each other like distant cousins know each other. They don't really know each other as close friends. They haven't spent hours talking. And so that marriage time, there's an awful lot of trust that goes into that. But in a Jewish family like all of us, who didn't have loads and buckets of money, what happened was usually the boys worked with the dad's business. The boys in the family. If it was a farm, or if dad was a leather maker or a tanner, or if he was some artisan, or like in Jesus' case, if his dad was a tecton, a builder, carpenter slash mason, stonemason, they quite often did what dad did. And the daughters, when they were married off, they went to live with their husband's family. But let's say in a son, at a certain point, when he got to be a young man, they would give him some building materials and show him where in the back, outside of the father's and mother's house, he could build. And in his spare time, he could build a couple rooms and have some friends help or him do it. And the dad was really good at keeping him busy, so he didn't have a lot of spare time to build. But he would build, and when the house was ready, and if the young man was old enough, and the house being ready, the house was all ready to move into, and the furniture had been either purchased or made, the house was ready, then they announced the wedding. And the son would go get the bride. And they would have two parties. One party at the groom's house, while they were getting ready for the wedding. Mm-hmm. So they'd have a party there. And then they would march all the way to the bride's house. Whole procession, led by the groom, who was well dressed and
lots of wine.
And so there'd already been quite a bit of wine and food, and everybody's happy, and they get to the bride's house, and they have the ceremony and another party. After that party, and the party's a big party, he takes her home.
To the house he built.
Mm-hmm. So when Jesus describes heaven in John 14, he said, I go to prepare a place for you. It's the wording of a bridegroom. So he said, when that house is ready, I will come for you. so that you can be with me.
Awesome. I never related that.
And
Me neither.
that's
I mean, that's cool.
that is what heaven is described as. The most joyous occasion that they could think of. That's what Jesus was emulating. He said, I'm going to come for my bride and take my bride home.
And they would understand that.
Mm-hmm. They could understand it, they could picture it, they could feel it in their bones. So that's what was happening here. What happens is they get to this part that we're reading is Jesus's mother and friends were friends of the bride, because they're not talking about the prior one where the groom is getting ready to come, or where the groom is processing in. And interesting, when the groom processed in with all of his friends and family and cousins and whoever was coming to that party, he'd send his best friend, who was like the best man. Remember who your best man was?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he would send the best man. He would not walk with the best man. The best man ran ahead to let everybody know the bridegroom's coming. He's coming. They finished the party and he's coming now. He's coming. Okay. Who was John the Baptist described as?
A cousin.
A cousin who was the forerunner, and he would come and announce, prepare the way of the Lord. He was and Jesus later said, he was the friend of the bridegroom. You didn't receive him. You didn't listen to him. But that's what John was doing. John was saying, he wasn't just repent and believe. He was saying, the kingdom is coming. The king is coming. The king is coming. So he was like the best man. This story really talks about at the bride's home. So the party they were having at the bride's home. And
Is that why it says on the third day? A third day, a wedding? It was a long party. They partied a long
I
time.
don't know that the 3 days was just about that, or was also about Jesus calling his disciples. So it's possible when he says the third day that he was saying after he called his disciples. So he barely called them. They really didn't know him real well. I think it was 3 days after calling those disciples.
Right, I see that.
They get to Cana of Galilee, and it was a bit of a walk, but his mother was already there, and we think his mom was a very good friend or a relative of the bride's family, because when they ran out of wine, she was the first to know. So she must have been there, or she must have been, like a lot of friends' moms, helping with the logistics. But this was somebody she was really invested in. Now, the Sabbath thing, wedding customs are different in different countries, different cultures. Joyce from New Zealand and England too. More generally, when you have a wedding, you are expected to have, a ceremony, and then you invite your guests to a place where they're going to have a sit-down meal, and a very nice meal, a well-prepared meal. So if your family is very modest income, you might invite 25, 30 guests. That's it. So, you're paring down as to which ones do I have to. You can lose a lot of friends. But that's their understanding of how you're going to treat your wedding guests. You're going to treat them well. It's going to be a special meal. And it's also understood if you really can't afford that, you do what you can afford, but you do it well. And so Joy's parents just about
Thank you.
fainted when they heard we were in college, and our college, there were a lot of marriages at the end of each year. It seemed like a lot of marriages, but you invited everybody. And there was, after the ceremony, there was cake and a bowl of nuts and some little savory sandwiches. That was it, and coffee and punch. And decaf coffee for those Methodists that were a little too excitable. But that was it. Well, when we let her know that let the parents know
I went.
that we'd invited 200 people. How could you do that? How irresponsible! That's because they were thinking in those parameters. Well, at this time, also, it said Jesus and his disciples were invited. They either invited more people than they really had food and drink for, or as happens in some of the Middle Eastern countries, we saw it in Brazil. If in Brazil, let's say I was invited to your house for dinner, and back then people didn't always call because people didn't have cell phones. But all of a sudden, my friend shows up with two of her friends.
Oh my God.
Joyce from New Zealand and England, to more generally, when you have a wedding, you are expected to have a ceremony, and then you invite your guests to a place where they're going to have a sit-down meal, and a very nice meal, a well-prepared meal. So if your family is very modest income, you might invite 25, 30 guests. That's it. So you're paring down as to which ones do I have to. You can lose a lot of friends doing that. But that's their understanding of how you're going to treat your wedding guests. You're going to treat them well. It's going to be a special meal. And it's also understood if you really can't afford that, you do what you can afford, but you do it well. And so Joy's parents just about
Thank you.
fainted when they heard we were in college, and our college, there were a lot of marriages at the end of each year. It seemed like a lot of marriages, but you invited everybody. And there was, after the ceremony, there was cake and a bowl of nuts and some little savory sandwiches. That was it, and coffee and punch. And decaf coffee for those Methodists that were a little too excitable. But that was it. Well, when we let her know that let the parents know
I went.
that we'd invited 200 people. How could you do that? How irresponsible! That's because they were thinking in those parameters. Well, at this time, also, it said Jesus and his disciples were invited. They either invited more people than they really had food and drink for, or as happens in some of the Middle Eastern countries, we saw it in Brazil. If in Brazil, let's say I was invited to your house for dinner, and back then people didn't always call because people didn't have cell phones. But all of a sudden, my friend shows up with two of her friends.
Oh my gosh.
At my house.
Y'all, this is Jason Wesson, and I know you've met him
Hi.
from church.
Hey, Jason, good to have you here. So in Brazil, if you invited somebody for dinner, but then all of a sudden, like just before Joy and I left for your house, our friend shows up with two friends. And it's really impolite to say, well, I'm sorry, we're leaving. So you say, hey, we're going out to dinner. Would you like to go with us?
Mhm.
And so we show up, not two of us, but five of us. And they just say, oh, a little more water in the beans. Because they have rice and beans. And so that also might have happened here, where they invited the right number of people and they had just enough for all that right number. But then another 20 people showed up. Anybody here watch The Chosen?
Part of
I've
it.
seen part of it.
Uh-huh. Well, season 1, the 5th episode is about this story.
Mm.
And it's a really, really, really good depiction. So they run out of wine. His mother knows that he is trying to downplay who he is and what he's going to be doing. He's trying to downplay that. And
Dear woman, he says.
yeah, but is that the
Dear
same
woman.
translation everybody else has?
Yes.
I brought a different New King James version.
Okay, and what
I've
does it
seen
say in
that.
yours when
What verse?
verse
Four.
4?
Jesus said to her, woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come.
Mm-hmm.
Woman. Mine says dear woman.
Mine does too.
Not mama, but
I know.
mother.
If I'd have said dear woman to my mother,
You wouldn't have anything.
Woman.
Well, we'll get to that in a few minutes, but that's, he says, in other words, my time isn't yet. I don't want to be doing huge miracles. People are going to take it wrong. People are going to just think I'm here to help everybody out. And she turns to the servants and she says, do whatever they tell you.
he said, whatever he said.
Whatever he tells you. And that's probably some of the best advice any of us could ever get. Do whatever Jesus
Mhm.
tells you to do. And now there were water jars there. What do you know about those water jars?
I would have thought they'd have been, for lack of a better word, ceramic, the big
They are
jugs.
Plain.
That's what I
Plain.
envisioned.
It says each hole
Big
be
U or
20 to
whatever.
30
Yeah, because these were
pounds.
carved out of stone.
Mm.
Yeah, you almost like a lathe, where
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
like a wooden bowl that's been cut out. They sort of do that.
Manually.
So manually.
Keeps it cold, I would imagine, too. Cool on the cooler side. A
On the
stone
cooler side.
That's true.
And it's not permeable, so it didn't get germs. It was kept it clean.
What was the purpose of this water?
Ceremonial washing.
Ceremonial washing. So what do you know about the Jewish religion? There were certain times they had to have almost like baptisms where they would wash with ceremonially clean water, or they would immerse themselves in ceremonially clean water.
That was to cleanse them from their sins.
There were a whole bunch of things. Like if you had touched a dead body,
Oh, that's right.
then you had to separate
leper.
yourself for a certain while, and then you had to wash yourself. if you were bleeding, either menstrual bleeding or if you just even cut yourself and there was blood and you washed that away and bound it up, got the bleeding stuff, you were ceremonially unclean. If you'd had sexual relations, if you had touched somebody else that was unclean, lepers, for example, were unclean. Well, if you've been too close to a leper or too close to somebody who's ill, there are just many, many things that would leave you ceremonially unclean. And so with that, you had to do certain washings. Now, if I put clean water in this cup to wash with, and I'm ceremonially unclean, let's say every once in a while they call me and I work at the funeral home in Gainesville. So if I'd been there helping get a person ready for visitation and somehow touch them, I would be unclean. Okay, well, after a certain time, then I would go wash. So I would pick this up, and guess what? Immediately, that becomes unclean.
Yeah.
I'm unclean, so I make everything else unclean. One of the ways I don't become unclean is if I go down to a stream where there's water flowing, and I take what they call living water, water that's being refreshed, or water that's coming in. That's where their mikvahs, the places they would do baptisms, had an inlet of water and an outlet of water, so the water was flowing. Another thing would be if they had a stone jar, because stone couldn't become unclean. Ceramic could. So they would have ceramic jars that they would have carried down to the well or down to the stream and then filled those. But when the unclean person came and touched that stone and dipped out some water, that stone didn't become unclean. There's many, many laws in the Old Testament. So a house that didn't have running water, which was most of them, would have a number of ceramic jars that they had filled for cooking and for normal cleaning, but they would also have these purification jars. And some of them, in some of the houses, depending on the house, they were big, 20, 30 gallons.
How'd they get the water out? Dip it?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. So they would dip it out, and they were very careful on doing that. So this house had 6 of those jars. They were big. And so Jesus says, go fill them with water. Well, the servants knew what to do, and they took some ceramic jugs, most likely, maybe some even leather buckets, and they filled those at the place where the water source for the village, and they came in and dumped it until they were up to the brim. How many gallons of wine?
That's a lot of wine.
That's a lot of wine.
Yeah,
That's a lot of party. And
Because each of them held 20 to 30
Right.
gallons.
yeah,
That could be a real party.
I would think so.
Go down.
I would think so. I make wine, actually, and I've got to go home and bottle. I don't think I'm going to have time today, but probably tomorrow. And I have a 6-gallon carboy that I make wine in. It takes quite a few weeks to make. And this I could have bottled a month ago, but that's 30 bottles
Oh, my goodness.
of wine. That's a lot of wine. I've got a lot of friends that I give it to.
Yeah, you have more now. You couldn't be invited, but then
In fact, that's the fun of it, is that you make wine you know how much a bottle of wine costs in the
Oh,
grocery
yeah.
store. A decent bottle is $8, $9, $10, $12. This cost me about $2.50 to $3 to make. So it's really fun. You go over to somebody's house and you take some wine.
So
But
are we having a party then?
but you think that's only 6 gallons and makes 30 bottles. This 20, even if it was just 20 gallons in each one, that's a lot of party. And so who really knew this miracle and saw this miracle?
Just the servants and Mary,
Yet Mary and the servants and Jesus.
right? Maybe not even the disciples. They might have been close by, but
I think they were probably the first told, because I can
they were the
imagine
first one
those
with their
servants.
cups out.
Yeah, but it could be. Um, uh, very well could be, because all of us have some Baptist friends who will go,
Mhm.
drink a glass of wine. Well, excuse me, he made it. I don't think he drank to excess, but he made it, and his disciples drank it. But I think they were probably the first to be blabbed to, because I bet those servants could not.
Fathom.
They couldn't fathom it, but they couldn't keep their mouth shut.
Be running mine.
They wanted to tell people, yeah.
I would.
And so, you can imagine those servants couldn't tell everybody, but anybody they had contact with, it was like, and so this really made, this is the only place in the Gospels where they record this miracle. But it's widely considered the first miracle that Jesus did. So I think I've described it enough, way too much. How would you define miracle?
A $25,000 check.
Yeah.
I actually do, because that was not somebody manipulating.
No.
That was not somebody writing one of these. Every one of us gets fundraising letters every week, sometimes every day, and they want you to give to some politician, or give to this, or give to that, or these starving children. Nobody was being manipulated. In fact, nobody was being specifically asked. And so then to all of a sudden have a couple come in, and not just that they gave and blessed us, but as they were here, they were blessed.
Mhm.
I mean, she walked away and said, I feel like we've been to church. And that's how all of us felt over there. But I'd say that's a miracle. But how would you define a miracle if you were telling somebody what a miracle is?
Unexpected.
Improbable. Something that.
So out of the ordinary, out of the natural.
Something you didn't see coming at all.
If I was your furthest reach, you
Mhm.
get there.
I don't think it's human. I don't think I can perform a miracle.
Yeah, I think
By
if I can
myself.
perform a miracle, then it was a wonderful, loving deed. But it's way out of our wheelhouse to be able to do that. Sometimes it's expected. I've had times where I've prayed for a healing,
Mhm.
and the person has been healed, but it isn't like my prayer made it happen. That was an ask.
Well, the disciples did miracles, right?
Yes.
After during the 40 days of between Easter and then after Pentecost.
Well, they actually did. There was a time before where he sent out 70 of his disciples. He had the 12, but he also had a larger group, and he sent out 70, 2 by 2.
That's right.
And they saw many miracles happen. and not everything that happened was written down. There were, I think, many more miracles. So I would say that something out of the natural order. It's supernatural.
It is.
Supernatural.
That check was.
And we've seen some. Sometime you can remind me, and I will tell you the story of a fellow named Mozart. And he was dying. This was in Brazil. And his sister was a member of our church. And he was a huge alcoholic. Just drank and drank and drank and drank. Drank himself close to death. And a very nice guy, very gifted carpenter. But there was a flood and he lost a lot of product and machines and wood and started drinking again and finally went into a coma, cirrhosis. And he was in the hospital dying. I went to pray for him. His wife and mother-in-law were spiritists, mediums. They were in the room. So I told him the story. I said, I really felt like I should have been here last week to witness to him. And he was dying. So I said, let's pray for him. So I held out my hands. They were on the other side of the bed. And I said, I prayed, and then I said, Mozart, I command you to wake up. And I command your spirit to come alive within you in the name of Jesus. And I felt really relieved. And I looked up, and here were these two women. They were plastered on the wall. Their eyes were about that big. And he was still breathing. A few hours later, the family got together to watch him die, filled up the room. And he all of a sudden stopped breathing, opened up his eyes, and he was back. And at the Spiritist Center, they said, the believer's God, he is not like our God. We stand around getting him ready to die, and this believer comes in and shouts. And he wakes up. Well, it was totally out of the order. That story is worth telling someday. But Jesus here does something totally out of the natural order. What do you think you learn about Jesus in verses 3 to 5?
I think she was a very strong-willed woman, and he obeyed, had a lot of respect for her. He listened to her, even though he didn't agree with her.
Now, what did you think about that? Because you said, I could never said that to my mom. Okay, why not?
Woman? That'd be the first thing.
Yeah. My face would have been up against that wall.
Yeah, because you
didn't
were
talk to your parents that way.
you didn't talk to your parents that way. But then again, she was always mom and you were always daughter. Is she still alive? Yeah. But she was probably mom and you were daughter until the day she died.
Right.
In Jewish society, a woman had to belong to a man. So a young unmarried girl belonged to her dad. If dad died, she belonged either to the older brother or to the uncle. Somebody had to be in command.
A male.
A male. Yeah. And so it's very strange when you have like Naomi in the Old Testament. She comes back and her husband's dead and her son is dead. And she and her daughter-in-law are living together and trying to eke out a living. well, one of the things that was so strange was she didn't have a man to not own her, but to, I guess, be the head over her. What do you think happened when Joseph died?
Oh, so he's dead at this time?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Jesus becomes the head of the house, not in a bossy, but where he goes, dear woman, It- she, in the construct of the day, it would have not been, that would not have been disrespectful. In the same way that if you said that to your mom, it would have been in our culture. It's like, most of us had to dance around parents, especially towards the end of their lives when you were trying to take care of them and they
Yeah.
didn't realize how much they needed you. And I remember Joy's mom a number of times taking care of her mother-in-law and saying, I hope, good Lord, that somebody takes care of me in the same way. But this would not have been as shocking to anybody that would have overheard that. I doubt that anybody heard that because I think this was all done on the side. But there was that construct that he was now the head of that household, and she was telling him what to do. And that happens all the time in the Middle East now, even when
Well, in Jewish society, the woman is usually the center of the home and runs the home. So she would have, it wasn't, to me, it didn't sound uncommon for her to say, do something, Jesus,
Mhm.
I know you can do it, do it.
because in the end, you've got a partnership in just about every one of those families. Even if the man is the man of the house,
Right.
you recognize how things work, and she felt the confidence to give an order,
Mhm. Mhm.
to say, do it, please, just do it. And she wasn't begging, because finally when he said, woman, it's not my time, do whatever he tells you.
Go ahead.
Just go ahead. And because she had full confidence in him. So you learn a little bit about Jesus and his mother at this time. How, that number 3, given the social customs, how would you have felt if you were the host?
I'd have been grateful.
Yeah, grateful.
Because I had all these people here and
Shocked.
Thankful it didn't look bad.
yeah,
All the
yeah.
guests. And I ran out.
Yeah,
of
of course you're talking post. I guess I was thinking of how this host felt when the wine ran out.
Probably panic.
Yeah.
They don't have enough. And that's.
Yeah, because what do you think that? Yeah, hospitality is huge, huge. It's huge here in Georgia. When we were kids, it was even bigger. Hospitality. Um, the front porch society, when you were sitting out on your front porch and people would stop by, and the way you treated them was very, 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 very important. Way more so even in Jesus's time. You invited friends to a dinner. You could drink tea with somebody, your across the street neighbor or somebody you didn't even like. You could drink tea with them. But invite them for a meal. If you invited them for a meal, that was you declaring they are my friends. They're just about kin. So they'd all been invited, and he ran out. The host ran out. Could be the host's husband didn't worry at all about it. It was the hostess
Yeah,
that was probably, this is going to look bad, and people are going to feel bad, and they're going to think I don't like my son-in-law. I'm showing disrespect for the guests. And I think it was probably Mary did this because she knew this was a desperate situation.
I didn't want her friends to lose face.
Uh-huh. What do you think it was like for the servants as they were obeying Jesus? He told them to go out and fill those jars. And then he says, take some of the water and take it out to the sort of the MC, the fellow who was running the party.
Master of the banquet.
Lee, what you think?
Well, I think that the little servants, if they poured it up, depending where, if the wine was already in the stone jars and they poured it up, they would have known right then that it was not water.
Yeah.
They would have said, otherwise they would have felt intimidated. I would have felt intimidated. What does he mean taking this water to the master of the banquet? I mean, I'm going to be beheaded, maybe. I don't know.
But he didn't probably say at the beginning, he said, fill the jars. And that would have taken a little bit of while, a number of trips to the well
didn't
or
happen
whatever.
They
And then
knew.
he said, take the water.
He says, take some, mine says, take some out and take it to the master. So at that point, I don't know whether it's wine or
I had
water
one
still.
friend that described this. He said, you ever heard of a CSG? A career shortening gesture? It was like they were gonna get the boots and water to the, and of course, as they're doing this, somewhere as they're doing it, as maybe they would have had a large dipper of some kind that would have filled the pitchers that they were using. They would have smelled it.
Mhm.
They would have probably tasted it. Just and probably would have been just almost a god. But they're the ones that have to put their job on the line to go do it, and they did it. How do you think they would have felt?
Amazed.
Mhm.
I think they would absolutely. What did they call it back then? Like a magician kind of thing. They called it something anyway. That's what I would think that they would think.
A trick, like a magic trick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they would have been rubbing their eyes, sort of saying, "We know that was water. We know," and they were probably called to each other as they were filling it up.
Yeah.
You were the one that put this was water. Just take a taste. I think they were just blown away. Now, I have to say, like last Tuesday, I spent the whole day amazed. Just happy amazed. Thinking, what a blessing for that little church.
Indeed.
What a blessing. How many bake sales did we save ourselves from?
Yeah.
How many calories?
Speaking of calories, can somebody? I've been looking at them.
So what do you think it was like for the groom and the family as the servants were doing that?
Thank you.
What do you think it was like for the groom and the family?
I'm sure they were so thankful.
Relief,
I think they were so thankful.
thankful, right?
They probably felt like he cares about it. He cares about it. And as we see that these windows, the people that worship here love, as we see those ready for another 50 years, in a way, it isn't like, okay, well, we've done our job. I think you sit there and you go, he cares about Flowery Branch United Methodist Church. He cares about us. Look at this motley group. He cares about us. And it's just one of those ways of, when somebody you love puts their arm around your shoulder and says, that's really, I think, how they felt. I think that's how we're feeling.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. That's what I was gonna say, number 6.
hmm,
Why did they make so much? I mean, he could have done one jug.
yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think?
I don't know. To make it just a magnificent miracle? I mean, maybe, I don't know what God
It
was
could
thinking.
be because that family was probably drinking that wine for a long time, and
Mhm.
probably even their neighbors.
Mhm.
People were. We were last month at the church, which is built over the place where this miracle happened, and they have a stone jar there that isn't quite as old as this, but
And-
it's the type,
Palestine,
and
in
it's big.
Jerusalem,
It's in Cana,
Cana,
and so it'd be up in Galilee.
okay.
And there was a wedding going on. It was,
Yeah, we didn't get to see the whole church because they were doing a wedding.
Mhm.
so they were walking up the street with flowers. They were walking up the street with, well, I think we saw a cake at one point too that was packed and he had to take it up. Somebody had to take it up the hill.
Yeah, you can't drive right up to this church. It's a cobbled street that's much narrower than this room. So anything you want to get to that church, you have to carry.
I think the wine quality says that, I'm God and I do the best. I want you to have the best. And he could do the best. He did the best.
Mm-hmm. I think too, it's just like the quantity. We're more miserly with how we do things. We want there to be enough, but we're not going to do too much. And he goes, "Oh, when he blesses you, guess what? He gives you way more blessings than you deserve, and then that you're ready for." It's just that is, I think pretty amazing. And
He wanted everybody to be able to try it. It wasn't just the heads of,
Mhm.
he wanted everybody to say, yeah, this is really top notch.
but they had it, and I would bet the rest of Cana of Galilee in the end had a little bit of that wine, trying it out, and they were very generous. I'm sure with it, but why exactly there was so much, I do not know. That why he didn't do just one or two stone jars, but all 6. And interesting, those jars had to then be, because they were only for water, they had to be replaced. But I have a feeling a couple was pretty happy to do it. Um, we could talk about the sign. Number 8. This is just for you to be thinking of. You don't have to say it out loud. But where is the wine level? And I'm not talking with an H. I've, I've been part of a few churches where there was a lot of whining.
Oh.
But it asks, where's what's the wine level, your zest for life right now? And, to be really honest, where is it right now? Because sometimes when we've been through a time of loss, either we've lost somebody or financial reversal, or um, we were at our granddaughter's graduation last night, and here the high school principal is retiring. He's had a very successful career, done a wonderful job with Lambert High School. But in the end, it sounded like he was charging out the door, and now I'm going to retire. Well, guess what? About 2 months from now, he's going to be wondering what to do except play golf. He's got to refit his whole life. And so many times, even on a big positive note like that, each of us have had losses where all of a sudden, we had one member of our church, his wife died. Kids said, "Dad, you gotta come live close to us." So they did. They got him a little place to live, and he had no friends and no place to go, and wasn't comfortable at church, and nobody's to have coffee with, and guess what? After about 4 months, all he could think of was loss. So his zest level went down. He's finally back in the retirement community where he was here in North Georgia. Unfortunately, he's not close to his kids, but he's got a whole number of friends that he's having meals with, that he's seen back to church.
His village, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, to stop to think, where are you, and is there something draining that zest? And that's something to be thinking and praying about. Now, somebody read John 20, verses 30 and 31. John 20, verses 30 and 31.
Jesus went on to do many more miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which were not even included in this book. But all of this is recorded here so that you will fully believe that Jesus is the Anointed One, the Son of God, and that through your faith in him, you will experience eternal life by the power of his name.
Okay, so there were so many miracles that happened that John had to sit down and decide, okay, which few am I going to tell? And the ones he did tell about, why do you think he chose those? He wanted you and me to believe more and to fully embrace Jesus. Why do you think he chose this miracle to help each of us believe more? Why do you think? This is not a little, pat, true or false. I'm asking this because
Most of us could relate to a wedding, the parties going on at the wedding.
him caring about
Yeah,
people, and
exactly.
something practical. Okay. Anything else? Why John chose this story out of many miracles?
Because it was the first miracle?
Maybe because it was the first public miracle. Now, who knows what he did when he was a kid?
Oh, that's true.
If he got mischievous, decided. Who knows? But this was first public miracle.
Well, going to Cana, it's a little town, a little church, a little, it was sort of, everybody was there, and the wedding, ordinary people. It wasn't just the higher ups and
Yeah.
the
Anybody
rich
here
people.
grow up in a small town? Yeah. So in a small town, everybody knew you, I bet. And they knew just about everybody that you knew. And if you did something, good or bad, they knew it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Didn't take too long.
Yeah, yeah.
Party telephone line got.
Yeah,
took
party
it.
telephone line.
Took that.
And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I could imagine that in Cana of Galilee, it's just a little village. It's still not a huge town, but it's a lot bigger than it was then. Everybody knew about it. So this was not like, oh, he did a miracle for some lady over there. You know, at times we'll hear about an answer to prayer that might have happened, or somebody might hear about this miracle we had last week. You go, you know, there was some church over there in the North Georgia district that they had somebody come in and
Just write a check.
write a check. Can you believe that? Well, that's not nearly as moving if you could say, hey, I got some friends over, and you got to hear what happened to my friends at their church. It becomes more personal. So it's like a little town. Everybody sort of knows what's happened and who, and so it was like widely known.
And he didn't have a whole lot of time here on earth either. So, you know, I mean, to get this miracle, like you said, the whole town knew about it. So then they told the next town before you know it, it just kind of was like,
Yeah, I bet that's another whole thing too. Is after a while, because they told their friends or some of their relatives, or somebody from Cana had to go do a job in the next village,
mhm.
and then the next village knew all about it. So as we look at these miracles over the next couple of weeks, just be thinking each time we're studying them, why do you think John put this one in, put that one in?
My thing about the wedding, though, I
Uh-huh.
was thinking about weddings are joyful and happy and all, and I'm forever telling my kids, make the most of every day, be as happy as you can. And so I'm all about being joyful and happy and, you know, while you can, you know, make the most of each moment. So
And that's a very, very good point, because think many people, when they think of religion,
not
they think
joyful.
of grumpy old Baptists, Methodists, Catholics, all the rules and all. You're misunderstanding who Jesus was. Jesus loved that party, and the party wasn't going to end. He loved that groom, and he wasn't going to let the groom's family or bride's family or the groom's family be embarrassed. He enjoyed his disciples, and he wanted his disciples to go, wow,
I bet they did.
I bet they did, yeah. So I'm going to suggest to you, you've got the outlines for
I think
the
I got
next studies,
look like I got them in the right order.
and our next study is
Healing
Yeah.
at the pool.
healing at the pool. And I'm going to ask you to take this home and to think about the questions. You'll read the scripture, think about the questions. But also to do something that you might not normally have ever done in a Bible preparation is to meditate on it. Now, there are many, many ways of doing Christian meditation. But one of them is particularly good with these kind of miracle stories. And that is that you read the miracle a couple times. So you've got it in your mind. And then get to a quiet place and close your eyes and imagine that scene and put yourself in it. Like if you were going to do this one, Jesus turning the water into wine, read the story a couple times, but maybe one thing you would do is then close your eyes, see that party, and maybe see yourself as one of the participants, one of the servants, going out, putting water, getting some more water, putting water in these big stone jars that were only partially filled, but they filled them up. And then Jesus saying, Go take some of it to the head man. And so imagine that yourself as part of that, and what it would be like, what the scene would be like, what you would feel like. It's not quite the same as studying. These questions will help you study it. But to think of it in a new way. Another way you might think of it would be the bride's mother. If you're going through this.